begin with the matric results. Let's start with the matric results. They just recently came out, and the union welcomed them, but warned that they should not be used as a yardstick to measure how the education system is performing. What are some of the main challenges that are faced by the educators and the learners on a daily basis?
Mangibonge kakhulu Ngiwi, and be grateful for the moment that we have to appreciate and congratulate our class of 2022 together with their teachers. I'm doing so because we need to contextualize the challenges that our teachers and our learners have faced, in particular for the class of 2022. They had a rotational system for 2 years, where basically they were dealing with a trimmed curriculum. And in 2022, they had to make sure that they cover the skills or knowledge and attitude for 2020, 2021, and 2022. That has taken efforts from the teachers and themselves. So one of the challenges basically was time, because they've lost a lot of time and they needed to recover. That what the teachers did, therefore, was to sleep at school on Saturdays up to Sunday, starting from Friday, work on weekends, work on holidays. Some of the challenges that we were seated with were load shedding. So our student had gone through rough time as if COVID was not enough. When they have to study, they had to go back to the old way of studying, candles, because there was no electricity for them to be able to study. And some of them were doing computer assistant technology, and some are doing IT. And clearly it is that it affected them in terms of loading their programs on that. So these are things that they were challenged with. There are so many challenges, by the way. One of the most important input into education is infrastructure. If you don't have proper infrastructure, clearly is that you're going to have overcrowding in the classroom, which basically deny the child that particular face-to-face, person-to-person, and contact with the teacher, because there's no way that you can be able to deal with 80 learners in the classroom.
The class of 2022 was very much affected by COVID-19. What are some of the inequalities and gaps that the pandemic exposed within the education system?
Well, we have to know that there were inequalities before the pandemic, and you're right that the pandemic was just the light that was shining on some of them. One of the critical issues that really is really undermining the dignity of a child is a child who would be in a school that has got no ablution system. A child who has been at that particular school with no water. In other words, the whole system of sanitation has been a problem, and therefore COVID exposed that to the extent that we needed to have tanks in the schools. We needed to have hired, hygiene toilets, something that nobody was paying attention to. The other issue is that the overcrowding I was talking about, what COVID did was to force us to reduce the class sizes. And that in itself said there are learners who, some of them, had to attend once a week, sometimes attend twice a week. So if you're attending twice a week, only a day or two means in a month time, you've only attended 4 times. And that in itself was really taking away the opportunity for our children, and their future was challenged and so forth. And some of the challenges clearly was that we only realized that time that we don't have enough assistants in our schools to assist the teachers, for the learners to be able to complete their homework, because parents are not there. Most of them are migrant workers in a country where basically is suffering from unemployment. Clearly it is that you would expect that a person from KwaZulu-Natal will be in Rustenburg, a person from Limpopo will find themselves somewhere in Middelburg or somewhere in Van der Bijl Park looking for a job. That means that particular learner at home had challenges, so we had to deal with those particular challenges. The most worrying challenge and that we met was mental health. Teachers were afraid, students were afraid, parents were afraid, and all of us had got to sit and say, how do we build resilience to be able to defeat this particular pandemic. And hence we're saying we have a special class of 2022 that has defied the odds and said we're not going to be defeated by the pandemic, we're not going to be defeated by what we see as challenges, but we're going to use those particular challenges into opportunities to learn and teach.
GS, you mentioned a lot of challenges, a string of challenges, but the NSC exams recorded a pass rate of 80.1%, which is the highest, the second highest since 2019, and which is a major improvement since last year. What is your take on this improvement, considering the string of challenges that the education system is faced with?
Thank you. Thank you. I want to recall 2020, where I said that when learners are faced with serious challenges, and parents and the teachers, we tend to produce leaders at that time, because leadership is not going to be tested when you are happy and when everything goes well. So the leadership, the resilience, and the perseverance of these particular learners were tested, and therefore they had shown that during difficult time, which basically was spelling some kind of a catastrophe, they needed to emerge, and that is what they did. But they did not do that because the teachers were happy about what they're doing, because the teachers left their families. The teachers did not have holidays. The teachers did not have afternoon. There are some schools that were coming from 8 o'clock and then ending at 8 o'clock in the evening. There are those that were giving learners about 2 hours in the afternoon, and then they have to come back at 6 o'clock until 10 o'clock in the evening. They did not do that alone. They did that with the parents. They did that with the SGBs. They made sure that they are able to accompany those learners to school, accompany them back home, drop them, each and every one of them at their gate, so that they are safe. So it took more efforts for our children to be able to achieve the 80.1% that they have achieved. It took more efforts from our students and our teachers for them to be able to, record the improvement that we have seen in terms of bachelor's, in terms of diploma, and also in terms of the certificates that they have done, but also in terms of the quality of specific subjects that they've been able to record. It was a result of the fact that they were facing catastrophe, and therefore they needed to do things differently. So it was not business as usual. It was that you are going to put more efforts, redouble or triple your efforts in order for you to pass. So they've gone through rough time for them to achieve that.
You spoke a lot about overcrowding in classrooms, and I would imagine that when the academic year starts, the discussion around the learner-teacher ratio resurfaces. What is the recommendation versus the reality on the ground when it comes to the overcrowding in schools?
The universal class size, basically, whether we want to call it a class size or teacher-learner ratio in the classes, is that universally is 40 in the primary school and 35 in the secondary school. So, but the reality is that that is not being followed. There are schools that were not built to be able to accommodate that particular kind of universal accepted class size or teacher-pupil ratio. So when we go to the rural areas, you have multiple classes or multi-grades. So you have got grade 1, 2, 3 in a class, and that will go up to 56. So the teacher will have to teach all of them. And then you again have to grade 4 up to grade 6. So there's 3 classes in one, and they've got to teach. That's the reality that we see that with. Where they have got classrooms, but they have got a lot of classes that are dilapidated, that are not working. They have almost like 80%. There's a school in Hamatlala that has got about 115 learners in grade 9. And remember that grade 9, it is a do or die, because it is the year where you've got to decide what stream you are going to be following in grade 10. So you've got to work harder, and that is the reality on the ground as compared to what is recommended as a teacher-pupil ratio or as a class size. That is not comparable to the independent schools, where the highest in the independent school will be 28 15:1. And most of the elite schools will be about 15:1 in the classroom. So your public schooling majority is that they will go beyond that. Even where you have resources like in Gauteng, resources like in Cape Town, because these are mostly urban provinces, you still have 46:1, 56:1 in primary schools, and mostly in high school you'll still find about 45:1. So it's almost 10 learners more than what you can be able to teach.
What is government doing about this? How is it addressing this issue?
Well, government has tried to build schools where they can, but the problem that we are seated with is that in 1994, all schools that are in the rural areas were of mud schools or reeds, and they were not built by a government. And therefore, they did not qualify in terms of the standards of a classroom that is required, in terms of the specification of a particular classroom that is there. So you do that and started building and so forth. But because the 1994, 1996, he opened education and said learners must be at school from 7 years to 15 years as compulsory education. So that in itself has brought a lot of enrollment. So South Africa is one of the countries in the world that when it comes to enrollment, we have reached what you can call sustainable developments. Before it was education for all goals that we were able to reach, because then you opened the doors for all children to come to school. Unfortunately, they were not matched by the infrastructure that was there, because the infrastructure was not meant to accommodate so many learners, because the apartheid system was happy that there will be child labor, there will be cheap labor, therefore only few would then have an opportunity to have to go to school. So that backlog is so stubborn, because the features of such is that you've got to look at whether you can provide scholar transport, or whether you have got to provide boarding schools for the learners who are traveling long distances, and therefore it competes with the building of the infrastructure. However, the other challenge that you are asking about, what is government doing? What government is not doing, it is that the government is not monitoring the building. It's not monitoring how the money that is granted for the provinces to be used for building schools, whether they're doing that. An example is a private company that would build a school that is the same size, with almost same facilities, 10 times less than what the government is building a school. So we have to ask ourselves, who else is benefiting out of what we are supposed to do for our children? Because if you build a classroom for 300,000, just a classroom alone for 300,000, if you build a security, what are you going to call it? A security office at the gate at 200,000, and that security does not have a chair, they don't have a phone, they don't have a monitor in terms of the security, but just that particular structure is more expensive than 10 RDP houses. So basically, it is where corruption is taking place. So that is what the government is doing, is to perpetuate the inequalities that were there by not monitoring that these things, we can do them on time.
There are qualified teachers who are at home, who are unemployed. How extensive is this pool of educators, and why are they not being absorbed within the education system?
Well, my comrade, I'm not going to lie to you and say I know the numbers that are there, how many they are. What I know, it is that when a school qualifies for 33 teachers, it will have 33 teachers. It does. Whether those who are outside and not being in the classroom are qualified in terms of the curriculum, that is a bigger question for me. Are universities producing what we want in our schools, or is mass production? Is the Funza Leshaka being, streamlined and making sure that it is informed by the audit that the department is supposed to do, to then say we need foundation phase teachers?
The bursary.
Yeah, we need them. So are the university going to produce that? Or they're just producing because I have applied, I want to be a teacher, and so forth? Okay, we are complaining about maths and science. Are universities producing maths and science and so forth, or they are just producing for the sake of saying we want to produce? So this bigger question of the pool that is outside not working, I think is a bigger debate. on whether, for example, my school has got about 46 teachers. That's what I qualify for. So I don't need extra teachers. But if we were to change things and say we need to absorb the teachers that are there, we need to review the weighting of our learners. We need to say, if your learners are learning in isiZulu or in Sikosa, we need to weigh that particular learners as 2 so that we get an extra 2 teachers, because teaching language and teaching geography at the primary school is not the same. Because the language takes a lot of work to do, because you've got to do reading, you've got to do teaching the children to write, you've got to make sure that they do comprehension and all those, and that is done by one teacher. So what the so-called apartheid education did for their own people was to weigh subject more like agriculture. So agriculture still today is weighted more than isiZulu or isiSotho, which does not make sense, because we're supposed to weigh them equally and so forth. So hence, when you teach music in school, music is weighted more than the most important subject, which is language. And so that in itself are the things that we need to be addressing to absorb the teachers that are there. But the universities are not playing their role. They are literally not helping us to produce quality teachers that are going to satisfy our curriculum in our schools and so forth. As I'm saying, I don't need teachers in my school. I have enough teachers that are there. What I need are specialists in remedial education. What I need are teachers who understand health, who must help my grade R teacher and support them. What I need in my school are assistant teachers who then will be helping those particular children to write homework, complete their homework, and so forth. And we can absorb these particular teachers who are outside there by making sure that we review how we weight the subjects. And in that particular, I'm an advocate of teaching our children in mother tongue. Because in another 5 years, if we do that, we will see that we can produce scientists, we can produce IT specialists, computer specialists, and everyone else, because they will be able to understand maths and science in their own language.
When a new academic year starts, it's always accompanied by complications when it comes to admissions, placements, and things of that sort. There is a new system that's been introduced now, which is the online system. It's here in Gauteng, but now it's been extended to other provinces. How has the reception been from communities and also schools in general towards this system?
Well, the schools have welcomed that. However, I must say that the parent community have not welcomed the online admission or application system, precisely because of lack of resources. Majority of our parents, as I'm saying, they are not staying with their children. They are working somewhere else, and they have got to do those particular applications. So one, they miss the deadline of application. Secondly, they don't upload the documents that are required at the right time, so that they are able to have the system placing their learners in terms of how they have been able to do that application. So hence the parents are not welcoming it, because it has got all those particular complications. As far as we're concerned as an organization, we believe that the online system can do better, because one, it can improve efficiency. Secondly, it can do away with non-integration, where you would have the former Model C school using some barriers like language and all these other things to protect their schools, so that they don't integrate, they don't democratize, and therefore keep their schools as so-called Africans. There's no African schools. The school is teaching either Afrikaans or teaching English, but you can't say to me, this is an African school, then we don't want. So the system was to help us be able to do away with those particular discretion that the principal in that particular school and the parents would say, we're going to give preference to the African-speaking children in order to integrate them. That's what the system was supposed to be doing. But the system has also a weakness, in the sense that the principal or those who are working at the school are able to say to the system, there's no more space. Okay, so they allow you to apply and so forth, but there's a time where they just block it and say it's full. It's full in a Model C school, but it's never full in a township school. Because in a township school, you will have to be seated with 400 learners who you cannot accommodate, but they will be saying it's full. But come after 2 weeks, after reopening, you see these guys are bringing their children there and they're being admitted in the former model state school. So to me, the system needs to be looked at and then so forth. But we cannot do away with that particular system because it's helping with efficiency. It's helping us with, helping the parents really to be able to upload those particular documents. So to me is that the parents must start also taking part in this particular process. As a principal, I hate a situation where I reopen the school in January. I don't know how many teachers I'm going to have. I want, when is the 30th of November, I want to orientate my new teachers who are going to be teaching in the next year. I need to know that I have 80 learners that I'm going to be having, therefore I qualify for 2 teachers, and I want to orientate those particular teachers immediately before the schools reopen.
Let's just go back and talk more about infrastructure. You touched a bit on it. SADTU has been calling for government to invest more on school infrastructure, and you even suggested that government impose a wealth tax on business. If you were to just paint a picture of school infrastructure in the country right now, what would you say about it?
Okay, let's look at how many microbuses are leaving townships and going to town, whether it's private school or independent or whatever. That is a picture of the fact that every parent wants their child to be going to a school where the infrastructure is good. So dilapidated buildings in our township, toilets that are not working, this is undermining the dignity of our children, the dignity of the people. So that particular infrastructure is a problem. So we need more funding. We need to review the so-called equitable formula, and our position as that is very simple. Take a school in Mfulo. If there's a primary and a secondary school, first you need to go and audit the needs of that particular school. Do they have whiteboards? Do they have, ablution facilities? Do they have got laboratories? Do they have got a library? And on the basis of that, you then have a school-based budget that you then submit and say, this is the budget. And then they can then do a universal budget on the basis of, a bottom-up, organic, developing of a budget. So it must be school-based. In other words, needs-based. So I can say a lot of things around that in terms of why we need that infrastructure to be improved. Because when you know the needs of that particular school, you can then be able to address that. Because we must not accept and say half a loaf is better than nothing. Where you have one school that has got a swimming pool the size of an Olympic swimming pool, and you have another school that have got a pothole, and then you call that a swimming pool. It can't work. You cannot have children going to school with broken window panes, and then you then say these children are going to, view themselves as equal to the other learner who is in a school that has got all these particular facilities. So we can't continue perpetuating that which was designed by apartheid to then say, if you are black, you are cursed. You belong there, and that is what is going to happen. And I'm against the situation that people come here and say to us, no. Why is it that people are fighting to go into the former model school? It's infrastructure, because the most important input in education is what drives you to teach, is what drives you to learn. So this thing of you can develop your own school, you can build your own school there, and so forth and so it goes back to Foster and Verwoerd, who says we're equal but separate development. What are you going to do with integration? What are you going to do with social cohesion? We need to be able to bring everybody into one. We said we're a rainbow nation. So infrastructure is bad. We don't have laboratories. We don't have libraries. So if we still have about 80% of our school today, no laboratories. If we still have 78% today of our school that have got no libraries, if we have got 58% of our schools today that still do not have books, research has proven that a book at home gives you an advantage. A book at school gives you a second advantage of being able to learn and develop more than the learner that does not have a book at home and a book at school.
And just in closing, the national budget will be tabled soon. how do you think the funds should be allocated to education to help with the very same issues that you are
We
talking
want the
about?
budget to be tripled. We want a special funding for education so that it relieves those that was exposed by COVID, so that we do away with pet litterants, we do away with lack of assistants and workers in our schools, in particular in the rural and the township school. We need money to employ cleaners. We need money to employ janitors in our school. We don't want this tenderization of the system where a door is broken, and where the door is broken, there is no general worker that fixed that particular door, because people want to offer tender so that one door that would have been fixed for what? 400, you fix it for 10,000. The same way that they do with bread. I mean, I don't know how much I pay for bread, but I want to believe that it's around 15 rand. A bread at school is 80 rand. Why is it different from you buying? Because the power for buying is different. So I want the president to address those particular things. We need efficiency. We need more money. We need to employ more assistant teachers. We need to employ more of our general workers who must help the principals and so forth, so that we can concentrate on teaching as the teachers. We need money for scholar transport. We cannot have a situation where our children are not being transported. The service providers that are helping us in our schools are not being paid. We need more money. So I want to say to the President, if we want to build this country, if we want the economy to grow in this particular country, let's invest in education, because this is the skill for 21st century. We can only produce if we have got highly qualified teachers, highly paid teachers, and the support from the education support personnel who are happy, who are trained, who are professionals in their own right to help our children, so that we can produce the skills that we need for this particular country. Because the mirror of our education, of our economy, is education. If we see 34% or 32% of unemployment, where do you look at? We must go and look at what we do to invest in education. So we need education investment and not an expenditure. Can they wake up in the parliament? Know that education is not an expense. Education is an investment. Fund public education. Fund the teachers.